Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to give folks just another minute or two to join, and then we'll get going. So just hang out. Thanks. All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the second round of town hall meetings on the 2021 Housing Element Update. My name is Christopher Jordan. I'm the city's Director of Strategic Planning and Innovation. Joined this afternoon by Sarah Bontrager from our Housing Public Services Group. Also joined by our consultant team from Placeworks, Jennifer Castellum and Cynthia Walsh, who will be helping with the presentation this afternoon. Just a couple of housekeeping items, and then I'll turn it over to Sarah. First off, you'll notice video and audio is disabled by default. What will allow us to focus on the presentation, and then we will have a dedicated portion at the end of the presentation for Q&A and discussion. We are recording the presentation, and we'll do the same for this evening's concurrent presentation. And we'll later post those up to the website. It takes about a week or so to get that processed and get the closed caption completed, so you can look for that later. So during the presentation, if you do have questions, please use the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen. You can type in those Q&As and then we'll get to you. And then at the end, we'll be able to do the Q&A as well, or you can raise your hand. There'll be an opportunity for discussion of the topic. So the agenda for this afternoon is the overview of the housing element and its components. And then we're going to talk about the goals and actions that make up the housing element itself. There'll be an opportunity for discussion, and then we'll just revisit the project schedule very quickly. So with that, I believe, turning it over to it's either Sarah or Cynthia.
This is actually going to be Jenny.
Oh, sorry, Jenny.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining us. Just going to recap. I know some of you have participated before, so apologize that this might be a little bit of a review, but just to bring everyone up to speed on the housing element and components. Do you want to go to the next slide? So the housing element is one of the required elements of the general plan, and it is unique because the housing element gets submitted to the State Housing and Community Development Department for review, and they have a 60-day review process. And upon that review, they provide us with comments that we address, and then we bring it back to City Council for adoption. So that is unique to this element. The housing element is required to be updated every 8 years. So the current housing element spans from 2014 to 2021. And the update that we are covering today will go from 2021 to 2029. There is a adoption deadline, which of May 15th, 2021. Our plan is based on our schedule, is to get into compliance, meaning address all of HCD's questions and issues and bring it back to the council for adoption by this May 15th deadline. The housing element is quite a technical document. It includes a big portion of the document has to do with community needs, and we look at existing needs and we project out for the next 8 years, and then we designate policies and programs, actions specifically that the city will take on for this 8-year period. And then there's a very large driving force part of this that requires us to identify land zoned at varying densities to support all housing types, from single family, rural type large lot houses all the way to multifamily housing, high density that is, and to address special needs housing for persons with seniors and persons with developmental as well as physical disabilities. So we cover all of those topics. Next slide. Great. So as I mentioned previously, we look at the existing needs and we project out what the needs will be for the next 8-year period. And then the inventory of land available. So the goal of the housing element to address the regional housing needs allocation. The state comes up with a number, basically a housing growth projections number over this next 8-year period. And then the state gives the number down to the councils of government. In our case for Elk Grove, that is the Sacramento Area Council of Governments. They put together a methodology that gives an allocation out to all of the jurisdictions that are in the SACOG region. And the job of Elk Grove is to identify land at these varying densities from, as I mentioned previously, low density all the way up to high density, being 20, 30, 40 units an acre. And we previously have talked about the process that Elk Grove's going through there on that. But the goal is to create a balanced community through allowing for development at varying densities. Another piece of this, in addition to allowing for development, is to identify what potential constraints are on housing development. What is the process from going into getting a building permit all the way to shovel ready? How long does that take? How much does that cost? And how does that compare to other jurisdictions in the region to ensure that development can actually occur in the community? And then we also do a checks and balances process where we look at the previous housing element, this last housing element from 2014 to 2021, and we look at what programs and actions were completed and what need to be continued and what need to be addressed for this next 8-year round. And then that feeds into today's discussion, which is the goals, policies, and implementation programs that we're presenting today. And some of these are based on new state laws that have come as a requirement during this last 8-year update process. So just as we get into this discussion, the goals are of the housing element. Each element in itself each element of the Elk Grove General Plan has a number of goals. We are not anticipating making changes to the goals. The city's worked hard to develop these, the blueprint for achieving the community vision. And so these are well intact. They are unique to Elk Grove, but they also address the state laws, and they are consistent with the other general plan goals and policies. So everything is kind of cohesive. What we're going to spend time talking about today is the actions, which are the to-do list. So the actions and implementation programs for the 2021-2029 housing element. So the city has to report yearly on how you are implementing these actions. So again, as I mentioned, some of them are state law requirements and some of them are things that the community desires to complete. And so it is on the city staff to report to HCD on an annual basis the progress in this next 8-year period. So keep that in mind as we're looking at these. And then I'm going to pass it off to Cynthia, who's going to talk further about some of our new actions.
Thank you. All right, so just to touch on the housing element goals, we have the list of the existing goals, and then we have a list of our draft goals. So the existing goals are to provide for adequate sites to accommodate housing needs in the city, development of housing for lower income and special needs groups, to remove governmental constraints, conserve and improve existing housing stock, and promote housing opportunities for all persons, and preserve assisted housing developments. You can see that we are one short on the draft. That is because we have consolidated goals 4 and 5. They fall under the same umbrella of conserving and improving the existing housing stock. So we thought that would be an appropriate change to make. So now we can look at the update strategy to preparing the housing element actions. So the current housing element includes 39 existing actions. You can see to the right, if you'd like to see a full list of the actions, they are located in Chapter 10 of the general plan at that link provided. The update strategy for these actions is to first retire any actions that were completed during the last planning period, which was the 2014-2021 timeframe. We then look to consolidate any actions where it might make sense. We then incorporate any public input and feedback and look at new state laws to formulate any new actions. We do want to try and focus on actions where we know resources are available. As Jenny mentioned, this is annually reported on, and actions are annually reported to the State Housing and Community Development Department, as well as the Office of Planning and Research. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about what we can actually implement as we are creating these actions. So looking at continuing actions, there are 13 that we are continuing from the previous. Some of them have been modified slightly, and some of them are just moving forward. It may be as small as a time frame. It may be to update a little bit more, modernize things. So the first one, the city will continue to annually monitor residential land to make sure availability for all housing types. Rezone housing sites. As part of this update, the city will be rezoning specific sites to meet the regional housing need allocation. The city will continue to review processing times, offer development incentives to assist with multifamily apartment development. To strengthen the site's inventory analysis, the city will continue to offer lot consolidation, which is taking multiple smaller lots and consolidating them into one larger lot, which is more feasible for an affordable housing project. The city will continue to offer fee deferrals to affordable housing developments and provide financial support, such as loans, to affordable housing developers when that's possible. A few more actions. The city will continue to assess the needs of persons experiencing homelessness and provide funding to assist with that. The city will also continue to fund agencies providing services to special needs, such as HART, which is Homeless Assistance Resource Team, and other regional entities. The city will continue to maintain a database of affordable housing units. There is a table in the housing element where these are all called out. We'll also monitor those projects for any that are at risk of losing affordability. The city will also offer development incentives for special needs housing projects. And the city will continue to operate the housing repair and rehab program. These are programs that assist lower income households who are in need, where their homes are in need of some sort of repair. This does include the minor home repair program that offers forgivable loans for residents. The city also will continue to refer residents to SMUD and PG&E who have some assistance programs available. So now we'll look at new actions to address state law. So there's three main new state laws. There's SB 35, which is a streamlining approval process for eligible projects. There's SB 48, which is looking at low barrier navigation centers. There's AB 2162. This is regarding supportive housing and where it must be permitted. And on the next few slides, we will talk through those a little bit more. Oh, I think that is not the right slide. There we go. Okay. Let's see, Senate Bill 35. So this went into effect on January 1, 2018, and it changed the local review process for certain development projects. It applies to jurisdictions that are not meeting the state mandated RHNA targets, which is pretty much everyone in the state, with maybe a handful of jurisdictions that, that don't fall into that category. Jurisdictions must use a streamlined ministerial review process for qualifying multifamily residential projects. At this time, housing proposals with at least 10% affordable units may be eligible for this streamlined process in the city of Elk Grove. So looking at low barrier navigation centers. Low barrier navigation centers are temporary service and rent shelters that focus on helping homeless individuals and families to obtain permanent housing. The city currently includes navigation housing use in the zoning code, so the code will just need to be slightly modified to address the low barrier entry practices. Looking at supportive housing. So supportive housing is housing that does not have a time limit associated with the length of stay, and it offers services to either the individual or to the families in the housing. The city must allow supportive housing with discretionary review, without discretionary review, in all zones that allow multifamily housing or mixed use development, including non-residential zones. So there are specific requirements that go along with this. It only applies to a project that is 100% affordable and includes a percent of the housing units for supportive housing. So either 25% of the units or 12 units, whichever is greater. And this only applies to new projects. So now we will look at staff proposed actions. So the city participated in a regional fair housing analysis. This is also called an AI, an analysis of impediments to fair housing. This addresses discrimination, overall patterns of segregation, and helps to reduce barriers to opportunity. As a part of this action, the city decided on specific items that would be action items that would be appropriate for the city to address these concerns. So you can see some of the actions included are the way to distribute fair housing information, proactively monitor rental housing providers for discriminatory practices, affirmatively recruit a diverse and multilingual staff, use data to identify areas of high need and areas of high opportunity. So this is something that we will be doing as a part of the rezone efforts for the sites inventory as well. So the next one is a parking study. So this has been included to conduct a parking study to determine the parking needs for senior housing and affordable projects. Based on the results of the study, the city could continue and most likely would continue to allow flexibility in development standards, including parking reduction for senior projects and allowing development incorporating universal design measures. Another staff recommended action is to evaluate innovative solutions and transformative design in new affordable housing projects. So this could be done through land acquisition, new project types, or financial support from the city. So the next, we're looking for any ideas for actions to include in, that you may be interested that the city include in the housing element. So I'm gonna pass this back over to Christopher to moderate any comments and questions that anyone might have.
Great, thanks, Cynthia. So again, if you've got questions or ideas, we're here to listen, talk about them, go through them. Again, you can use the raise hand feature and we can get your mic turned on, or feel free to add it to the Q&A box. So just give me a minute here. All right, Lynn, you should be good. Lynn, you're up first. Should be able to mute. There you go. Fortunately, we're not hearing you, Lynn. Yeah, maybe Lynn, you could type in your item, and maybe we can circle back around when you're ready. Okay, so we did get one in the Q&A from Robin. How much is the shortfall that will need to be rezoned? I know we've gone over that in a prior discussion. I can pull it up here as we go into any additional questions, and we can talk about it briefly, but encourage you to go and check out the presentations and recordings that we have up on the website right now. elkgrovecity.org/housing element is the website. If you've not signed up for the mailing list, encourage you to do so there. We've got project updates going out when materials are available or when we have more of these town halls that are going on. Next one's from Sharon. How are you going to address the very poor infrastructure going from Elk Grove to Sacramento? Before any of this happens, we need more higher end jobs in Elk Grove. How are you addressing this? So Sarah, I don't know if you want to answer any of that, but it might be more in my end. From an infrastructure perspective, certainly that's something that gets looked at a regional level. And there's funding programs that are out there at the regional level for dealing with things like transportation. We do coordination with the county and Sacramento City, and then with the regional planning agency, SACOG, to look at those issues and consider that. On the jobs end, certainly this is an ongoing issue for the city. We've identified land for new employment centers and have been actively looking at and facilitating construction infrastructure to serve that area in the future. Our economic development team does a lot to work on recruiting of businesses, but also homegrown businesses, meaning can we take and incubate startups that are in the city. We've got a great startup program that they've been working on for the last year or so to cultivate those businesses, provide them opportunities and grants to move forward. So those are some of the areas we're looking at, obviously, but there's a lot more that we'll continue to do. Next one is from Lynn. She was able to type her question in here. How did the staff determine the proposed actions? Did you have the stakeholder meetings as recommended by the council? Sarah, do you want to talk about that one?
Sure. Yeah. So, so some of the proposed actions are carryover from previous years. Some of them are also requirements due to state law, and so we don't have much control over those. But as for the ones that are kind of staff recommended, yes, we did have some specific stakeholder meetings. We did a lot of outreach with our consolidated plan effort, which we adopted earlier this year in June. And so we used a lot of the stakeholder input that we got from that process, as well as when we participated in the regional analysis of impediments. We did a lot of outreach in that, including at some of the community events. And these documents are all tied together. They all share some of the same goals and some of the same background information. And so, so we've tried to do some really robust outreach related to these efforts. Some examples besides the community events would be going to the Hart Winter Sanctuary last year and speaking with the folks who were staying there in that program, attending the free community breakfasts at Elk Grove United Methodist Church, interviewing clients of the food bank, talking to a lot of our nonprofit organizations and some of their clients. And also we had a meeting with the Sacramento Housing Alliance And then also with their special group of developers that they meet on a monthly basis. They were generous enough to give us some time at that meeting with a lot of those developers to collect some feedback too. So we've tried to have a pretty robust process. It's been a little bit more difficult, obviously, since COVID to really get out there and have the in-person meetings. But we've tried to provide a variety of forums for feedback, and I think we've gotten some really good suggestions.
Okay, so it looks like Lynn mentioned she's got her mic working again, so just go ahead and give that a shot, Lynn.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm glad that I got it working. So I thank you for having this meeting today so that we can ask some questions and maybe have a little bit of a discussion here. So I want to talk a little bit about the flexible parking reduction in our senior housing. I have been visiting our senior housing, the affordable complexes, and the one on Bilby, I can say that it does not have any parking for visitors. And so what's happening now at Bilby and Bruceville are people are having to park on the street, and it is very frustrating for visitors. So though we'd like to believe that a lot of our seniors aren't driving or don't have more than one senior living within that particular apartment, some are, and they each have their own cars, and there just isn't enough parking. So it is extremely concerning to me when we look at reducing the parking spaces. Another comment that I'd like to make is we go ahead and we're looking at some of our special group of developers. That particular apartment complex on Bilby, I know somebody that is moving out of that is disabled, that has had difficulty with just 2 elevators and having to walk or try to manage to get a very long distance from that. And also the circulation, the air in the hallways, it is very, there's not good circulation. And this summer, it's been particularly hot in those hallways. So as we're looking at approving future projects, I hope we can consider some of those aspects. And then my last comment is I really am still going to push for what I believe that we need to have within our community to address this, and that is inclusionary housing. So I heard mentioned today something about we could streamline the process if 10% of the units within an area or a residential area are affordable units. Well, I know Taylor Morrison is doing an inclusionary project up in residential area in Roseville. And so they are some of the same builders that come to our town. So I'd like us to really push for that so that we can make sure that we are offering a variety of affordable housing and not just doing apartments. So those are my comments for today. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Lynn. I don't know if Sarah or Cynthia, if you wanted to touch on any of Lynn's comments. I know with the parking specifically, we do have that as an action item that needs further study, and there's actually a state grant that we're receiving funds for to do a city-specific analysis about what the actual parking needs are, at looking at the existing sites, and obviously the Bilby Bruceville site will be one that we'll specifically make sure to study and do some parking counts out there.
Yeah, I would add, this is Sarah. I would add, you know, I'm aware of some of the challenges of the of that particular apartment complex. I think it will be interesting to see in the parking study how the number of cars that are parked there compares to the number that are parked at, say, the complex that's on Bighorn and Laguna, which is much closer to transit and services. And, you know, see if there's a difference there in terms of proximity, and that might be a factor in it. I do also recognize there are some design challenges there that I think we would we would look at for future projects. You mentioned several. I know another one that we've come across is the mailboxes. The height of the mailboxes isn't reasonable for some of the seniors. So we are looking at those design elements and trying to really get more focus on the design aspect, both exterior and interior, and from a functionality perspective as well as aesthetic, as we look to elevate our future affordable housing projects.
I'll circle back up on Robin's question from earlier on the shortfall for rezoning. Again, encourage you to check out the website. We've got a bunch more information up there. But our very low RHNA allocation for this cycle is for 4,265 units. There's about 3,000 or so that can roll forward, or I'm sorry, actually there's about 2,800 that we think will roll forward. There may be some opportunities to increase the allowed density on some of those sites, which could get somewhere between that 2,800 and about 3,200. So, on average, I'd say there's about 3,000 units that could probably roll forward. So that leaves us with somewhere between about 2,000 and about 1,500 and 2,000 units that would need to make up the difference on. And those are round numbers. But again, you can check it out there. Also encourage folks, if you haven't filled it out, on the website is the survey tool, which allows you to put together your own housing plan to identify how you would allocate that or how you would disperse those units around the city. It is the more traditional way to do it, that we do it with more of a zoning basis as opposed to an inclusionary program. On the inclusionary piece, I will say we've discussed it very briefly with the City Council at the end of August in the agenda item as part of the larger housing element update and the status. And there was a request to look at that a little bit more and provide some more information. So staff's working on pulling that stuff together. I don't have a specific time frame yet, though. So with that, are there any other questions? I know I see, Lynn, you've got your note in here about the Bayport and Laguna site being difficult to get into. Appreciate that comment. Anyone else? Yes, Lynn.
Okay, I have one more comment. So I've been looking at and researching the number of registered rental properties that we have within the city of Elk Grove. And I know that as we're looking at where we're going to have our affordability places, that you divided up those multifamily housing sites by district. And so when I did my research about the registered rental properties in Elk Grove, I'm wondering if you would consider including those numbers, and I know it can shift as people either sell their properties and no longer own them, or, I know that we have out of town investors that own some of our rental properties, but those numbers can shift. But are we going to, or would you consider looking at those registered rental properties when we're considering where we're going to place the multifamily housing sites?
I think that's certainly a data point we could look at. I know the council had some other thoughts on data we should be looking at, including the total number of housing units that are in whatever geographic area we consider it off of. So yeah, that's another data point. I appreciate the suggestion.
Thank you.
So I do want to circle back if there's any other ideas or questions relative to the programs themselves. We'll make sure we're hearing everybody today. Okay. So I think we'll go over real quickly the next steps. This is the schedule we've been sharing for a few months now. So I believe we're on schedule at this point here in fall of 2020 with the town halls on the policies. Again, we'll have a second version of this later this evening. Sorry about that. And then we'll continue on the outreach on the sites. We've got more outreach we'll do with property owners and with the community on that as we head into the new year. And then first of the year, we'll have the housing element itself draft ready for public review, as well as the accompanying environmental impact reports. And then that will send us into the Planning Commission and City Council hearings later in the year. And as Jenny mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the statutory deadline is for adoption by May 15th. So we have a bit of a tight schedule there. I see, Lynn, your question here on the boarded up homes. Is there a way we could address this through the housing element? Yeah, I think there's some items we've got on the goal relative to conserving housing stock. That may be someplace we could look up there. So certainly that would be part of this as well. Okay. Any others? Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody and for participating today and joining us. Again, if you haven't already signed up for the email distribution list, please go to the website and do that. Also, if you've not filled out the site survey, please do that as well. And we'll get information up there on a regular basis. These videos from today will be posted up probably middle of next week, if not the end of next week, because we do have to make sure we get the closed captioning completed. So that takes us a little bit of time to get that done. So otherwise, thanks everybody for participating, and we will see you again later. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.